The morning rain drummed against the windows of the Four Seasons Beverly Hills like an ominous warning. At 6:47 a.m. on this gray Tuesday, Elena Vasquez finished adjusting her burgundy uniform in the staff mirror, her calloused fingers touching the small silver cross at her throat, a gift from her abuela, before crossing the border 30 years ago. At 32, Elena carried herself with the quiet dignity of someone who had learned to find strength in invisibility. Her dark hair was pulled back in a perfect bun, her posture straight despite 16-hour days split between 3 jobs. She moved through the hotel's marble corridors like morning mist, essential but unseen, present but unnoticed. From his security booth, Marcus Johnson watched her pass. 20 years on this job had taught him to read the weather in people's faces. Today felt different, charged like the air before lightning strikes. He kept his radio closer than usual. Elena paused outside the main ballroom, checking her reflection one final time. In her left pocket, she carried a folded report card, her daughter Sophia's straight A's proof that sacrifice had meaning. Every condescending glance, every swallowed insult, every ache in her feet was for Sophia's college fund for opportunities Elena never had. She didn't know that across the city, tech mogul Marcus Drake was having the worst morning of his life. His wife had served divorce papers at breakfast. His biggest competitor was stealing clients. His board was questioning his leadership. He was primed for explosion, looking for someone to blame. Elena entered the ballroom, where crystal glasses caught light like tiny prisons of reflected dreams. White linen stretched across mahogany tables like fresh snow waiting to be stained. At table 1, the stage was set for tonight's $4.8 billion merger announcement, where fortunes would be made, where respect would be tested, where Elena's quiet strength would meet Marcus's loud fury. The trap was set. The players were moving into position. And Elena Vasquez, invisible in burgundy fabric, was about to become the most visible woman in America. She touched her cross once more, whispered a prayer for strength, and stepped into history. Marcus Drake believed in making entrances. At 45, the CEO of Drake Tech Solutions commanded attention the moment he entered any room. Italian leather Swiss watch presents that filled space like expensive smoke. But tonight, rage simmered beneath his polished exterior like lava beneath marble. His wife's betrayal burned fresh. 20 years of marriage dissolved over coffee and legal papers. She'd cited emotional cruelty and systematic dehumanization of others, words that stung because they rang true. He was looking for someone to prove her wrong, someone to dominate someone beneath his notice to remind him of his power. At table 1 sat venture capitalist David Chen, representing a coalition of Asian American investors worth $4.8 billion. Chen had flown from Silicon Valley specifically for this merger, but he was also recording everything, a habit from years of dealing with executives who mistook quiet observation for weakness. Elena approached with the wine selection on Chateau Margaux 2010, $900 per bottle, ordered specifically to impress tonight's guests. She moved with practiced precision, years of service refined into an art form. Finally, Marcus muttered, not to Elena, but about her as if she were late furniture. His morning's disasters had him seeing enemies everywhere, especially in people who couldn't fight back. Elena poured carefully. The wine flowed like liquid silk, deep red against crystal. But as she reached Marcus's glass, his phone buzzed. Another crisis alert from his crumbling marriage. His elbow jerked suddenly, whether by accident or subconscious design. The glass tipped. Wine spilled across the pristine tablecloth like blood across snow. Several drops stained Marcus's monogrammed cuff, MDS in gold thread, now crimson marked. You clumsy bitch. The explosion came before thought could temper it. Look what you've done. Do you know what this jacket costs? More than you illegals make in a year. The silence that followed was arctic. David Chen's phone captured every word, every sneer, every moment of unveiled racism. Other diners froze forks, suspended mid-bite conversations dying like flame without oxygen. Elena stood motionless, napkin in hand, eyes downcast, but spirit unbroken. She'd heard worse whispered in shadows, but never shouted for all to witness. Never with such venom. Never with cameras rolling. "I'm very sorry, sir," she said quietly, her English perfect, despite the slight accent Marcus chose to hear as ignorance. "Let me clean this right away." But Marcus wasn't finished. 20 years of privilege and prejudice came flooding out like toxic waste from a burst dam. He grabbed her wrist as she reached for the spill, not gently, not politely, but like a man asserting ownership over property. "You don't touch my things until I say so," he hissed, wine-thick breath making her stomach turn. "You stand there, and you think about how your carelessness just humiliated me in front of important people." David Chen stopped pretending to check emails. His recording was crystal clear, audio and video of a tech CEO physically restraining a server while spewing racial slurs. Pure career poison in digital format. From the service entrance hotel manager, James Kim watched through security monitors, his face darkening with recognition and disgust. He'd seen Marcus's type before. Men who treated staff like property, who believed money bought them the right to humiliate others. He quietly called upstairs to ownership. Marcus released Elena's wrist with a shove and turned to his table with cruel satisfaction. "This is exactly the problem with this country," he announced to potential investors. "No standards anymore. They don't understand consequences, don't appreciate the opportunity to serve people who actually matter." Some guests nodded uncomfortably. Others studied their plates intensely. A few pulled out phones, instinctively documenting what felt like a historical moment. The kind that ends careers and changes laws. Elena stepped back, her wrist throbbing, but her dignity intact. She'd learned from her grandmother that sometimes the most powerful response was perfect stillness. Let angry men reveal their true faces while good people watched and remembered. Across the room, an older man in an expensive suit observed the exchange with laser focus. Something about his stillness, his complete attention, made Elena's skin prickle with recognition she couldn't place. The storm was gathering. Marcus Drake thought he was asserting dominance, but he was actually hanging himself with his own rope in front of witnesses on camera with no way back. Thunder was coming. David Chen had seen enough. The Silicon Valley veteran stood slowly, his movements deliberate, as a chess master making a final play. When he spoke, his English carried the crisp authority of Harvard Business School and the weight of old money. "Mr. Drake," he said, his voice cutting through the tension like surgical steel, "before we discuss any merger arrangements, perhaps you could clarify something." Marcus straightened, suddenly aware his outburst might have professional consequences. The $4.8 billion deal hung in the balance. "Of course, Mr. Chen. What would you like to know?" David smiled, but winter lived in his eyes. "I'd like to know if this is standard operating procedure for your company, because where I invest character matters more than quarterly projections." The temperature in the room plummeted. Marcus's confidence cracked like ice under pressure. "I think there's been a misunderstanding," he backpedaled frantically. "I was simply addressing a service quality issue. I witnessed no service issue." David interrupted with surgical precision. "I observed a professional young woman performing her duties while being subjected to racial epithets and physical intimidation. I recorded all of it." The words detonated like grenades. Marcus's face cycled through pale shock to crimson panic. "You recorded private business discussions. That's completely inappropriate." "What's inappropriate," David said, rising to his full height, "is what you just inflicted on that young woman. What's inappropriate is assuming such behavior would be acceptable to potential business partners." He gathered his papers with movements sharp as blade strokes. "Drake Tech Solutions is no longer under consideration for our investment portfolio. The $4.8 billion we came to discuss will find worthier recipients." Marcus's world tilted on its axis. 4.8 billion. Wait, we can discuss this privately, work out any misunderstandings. But David was already walking toward Elena, who stood frozen in disbelief. He bowed slightly, a gesture of respect that brought tears to her eyes. Miss, I apologize for witnessing such treatment without intervening sooner. No one should endure that anywhere, especially at their workplace. Elena managed a trembling nod. Thank you, sir. Your words, they mean everything. As David Chen exited, other investors began following like dominoes falling in sequence. The exodus was quiet but unmistakable. One by one, the power brokers who'd come to celebrate Drake's triumph instead bore witness to his destruction. By the time the main course should have arrived, Marcus Drake sat alone at table 1, surrounded by empty chairs and the ashes of his ambition. His phone buzzed incessantly. Board members, lawyers, crisis management firms, all demanding explanations he didn't have. But the real earthquake was just beginning. From across the room, the older man Elena had noticed earlier approached with measured steps. Up close, she could see the quality of his tailoring, the quiet authority that came from real power rather than desperate posturing. Miss Vasquez, he said gently, my name is Miguel Santos. I believe we need to talk. Elena's knees nearly buckled at the sound of her full name spoken with such familiarity. Miguel Santos stood before her like a figure from a half-remembered dream, expensive suit, kind eyes, and something achingly familiar in his weathered face. You know who I am, she whispered. I've been looking for you for 15 years, he replied softly. Ever since your grandmother Rosa sent me a letter before she died. She told me about a brave young woman raising her daughter alone, working 3 jobs, carrying our family's strength in her shoulders. Elena's mind reeled. The family stories her abuela had told in whispered Spanish about relatives in America, about doors that had closed and bridges that had burned, about a successful businessman who'd been cast out by his own father for loving a woman deemed beneath their station. Tío Miguel. The childhood name escaped before she could stop it. He nodded, tears gathering in his eyes. Your father's younger brother. The one who supposedly brought shame to the Santos name by starting with nothing instead of inheriting everything. Elena stared at this stranger who was somehow family at this impossible turn in her impossible life. But why now? Why tell me this now? Miguel's expression hardened as he glanced toward Marcus, who was frantically working his phone at the abandoned table. Because tomorrow, that man will try to destroy your life out of spite. He'll use his lawyers and his connections and his money to make you pay for his embarrassment. I don't understand. Santos Holdings owns 37% of Drake Tech Solutions, Miguel explained quietly. I've been watching Marcus Drake for months, waiting for him to reveal his true character. Tonight, he didn't just show it, he performed it for cameras. The pieces clicked into place like tumblers in a lock. The merger that had brought all these investors together wasn't just any business deal. It was Marcus selling his company to the very family he'd just insulted. He doesn't know, does he? Elena asked. Miguel shook his head. Corporate structures are complex. He thinks he's dealing with faceless Asian conglomerates and European investment firms. He has no idea that the Santos family emigrated from Mexico 70 years ago and built an empire brick by brick. As if summoned by their conversation, Marcus appeared at Elena's shoulder, flanked by 2 security guards and a man in an expensive suit who radiated legal authority. There she is, Marcus pointed accusingly. I want her arrested for assault. She deliberately destroyed my property, sabotaged my business relationships. Mr. Drake. Miguel interrupted, his voice carrying new steel. I don't believe we've been formally introduced. Miguel Santos, chairman of Santos Holdings. Marcus's bluster died in his throat. Santos Holdings was worth more than his company by several $billions. Mr. Santos, of course, but this employee attacked me. Okay, what I witnessed, Miguel said with deadly calm, was you assaulting my niece, and it's all been recorded and preserved. The silence that followed could have stopped hearts. Marcus's lawyer whispered frantically in his ear. His face went from pale to green as the implications crashed over him like a tsunami. He'd just destroyed his career by attacking the family that owned his future. "Your niece," he stammered. Miguel smiled, but ice crystals could have formed from its chill. "Elena Vasquez Santos, granddaughter of Rosa Santos, who cleaned your father's offices for 20 years before he fired her for asking for a raise. Daughter of Carlos Santos, who died building the very towers you conduct business in." Elena felt the ground shifting beneath her feet, but this time it felt like foundation settling rather than everything collapsing. For the first time in her adult life, she wasn't standing alone against the storm. "She's family." Miguel continued, his voice carrying across the now silent ballroom. "And tomorrow morning, when our board meets to finalize the Drake acquisition, we'll be discussing whether a company led by someone with such profound character defects deserves to carry the Santos name." Marcus Drake, tech mogul, merger king master of his universe, crumbled like ancient paper in his expensive suit. The revolution had begun, and it was being led by the woman he'd tried to make invisible. The legal papers were served at dawn. Assault charges, harassment, discrimination. David Chen's video provided evidence so overwhelming that Marcus Drake's lawyers recommended immediate settlement. By noon, the story had exploded across social media. Justice for Elena trended globally. The Latino business community rallied. Silicon Valley's diversity advocates organized boycotts that crashed Drake Tech's stock price. But Elena wasn't watching the headlines. She sat in Sophia's bedroom, helping her daughter with college applications she could now afford, watching her 16-year-old's face light up with possibility. "Mommy, is it true?" Sophia asked in rapid Spanish. "Are we really related to the Santos family? The ones who own half of downtown?" "Apparently so. Mija." Elena replied, still adjusting to the idea herself. "Your great-uncle Miguel says we have a legacy to reclaim." The bedroom door opened softly. Miguel entered, carrying a manila folder thick with documents, property deeds, trust fund papers, college accounts established in Sophia's name years ago when he'd first learned of their existence. "Your grandmother was too proud to accept help," he explained. "But she made me promise to watch over you both from a distance. Tonight just moved up the timeline." Elena studied the papers that represented security she'd never dared imagine. What happens to Marcus Drake? Miguel's expression hardened. "The merger is canceled. His board voted him out this morning. Criminal charges are pending. But honestly, the worst punishment is that the whole world now knows exactly who he is. And his company, Drake Tech, will be restructured, sold in pieces to competitors who actually value their employees. The 2,000 people who worked there won't suffer for their CEO's failures. We've ensured that." 3 months later, Elena stood at a podium in the Los Angeles Convention Center addressing the International Conference on Workplace Dignity. The woman who'd once been invisible in burgundy uniform now wore a tailored navy suit and the confidence that came from knowing her worth. "Respect isn't earned through submission," she began, her voice carrying to the packed auditorium. "Dignity isn't granted by superiors. These are basic human rights that don't depend on your title, your accent, or your uniform." In the front row, Sophia beamed with pride beside Miguel, who'd become the grandfather she'd never known she needed. In the back, Marcus Drake's former employees, now leading workplace advocacy groups, wiped away tears of recognition and hope. "My daughter asked me yesterday if I regret that night at the hotel," Elena continued. "If I wish none of it had happened. The answer is no. Because suffering that leads to justice isn't suffering wasted. Pain that opens doors for others isn't pain in vain." After her speech, a young Latina server from the convention hotel approached nervously. "Miss Santos, what happened to you gave me courage to report my supervisor. People listened because you showed them they had to." Elena hugged her tightly. This was why the humiliation had meaning, not for the money or position or even the family reunion, but for moments when one person's refusal to accept injustice created space for others to demand better. That evening, Elena walked with Miguel through downtown Los Angeles past buildings her grandfather had helped construct through neighborhoods her family had shaped for generations. "Do you think Abuela would be proud?" she asked. Miguel smiled. "Rosa always said the Santos strength wasn't in our money or our buildings. It was in our refusal to let anyone make us small. Tonight, you proved her right." Above them, the city lights twinkled like earthbound stars. Somewhere in those lights, other Marcus Drakes were learning that cruelty had consequences. Other Elenas were discovering they had voices worth hearing. And in a downtown apartment, Sofia Santos Vasquez was writing her college admission essay about a mother who showed her that heroes didn't need capes. Sometimes they just needed the courage to keep standing when the powerful tried to make them kneel. 6 months after that terrible Tuesday, Elena received a letter from an unexpected source. Marcus Drake, writing from the minimum security facility where he was serving his sentence for assault, had sent an apology. Not the performative kind designed for public consumption, but raw, honest acknowledgement of harm done. She never replied. Some apologies come too late for forgiveness, but just in time for closure. The world had changed. Not completely, not overnight, but measurably. Employment discrimination lawsuits increased by 40% as workers found courage to speak up. 3 states passed stronger workplace protection laws. 23 Fortune 500 companies implemented new dignity training programs. Elena Santos, she'd legally reclaimed her full name, now headed the Santos Foundation's Workplace Justice Initiative. Every day brought new cases, new fights, new opportunities to ensure that what happened to her became harder for others to endure in silence. Because sometimes the most important revolution begins with one person refusing to disappear. Sometimes it starts with someone saying, "I see you, I hear you, you matter." And sometimes that's enough to change everything.